The coalition had already stamped the file. Humanity, Tier 4, harmless. The classification was seconds from being locked when a junior analyst opened a document the humans themselves had written, not a military dossier, an environmental impact report. Every single year on Earth, they casually move more sediment than all their rivers combined. They dig copper mines 2.5 miles wide just to wire their cities. They reverse the flow of entire seas. And the analyst found a file from 1946 where they detonated a nuclear device underwater just to see what would happen. It cracked their own seabed. The analyst went pale, scrolled further, and hit the emergency reclassification button. The analyst's screen displayed humanity's own environmental impact assessment. 60 billion tons of rock and soil displaced annually. They'd reversed rivers, flattened mountains, and cracked their seabed with nuclear tests, all in peacetime. The Tier 4 classification was dangerously wrong. These weren't simple pacifists. They were planetary engineers who had never met a species that could fight back. Krell had been an analyst for 15 cycles. In that time, he had classified 17 species. 16 of them were Tier 4, peaceful, fragile, evolved on garden worlds with gentle breezes and predictable seasons. The coalition system was simple. Tier 1, existential nightmare, reserved for species that had already attacked another. Tier 2, armed and aggressive. Tier 3, capable of conflict but contained. Tier 4, no threat. The stamp was always the same: open trade, low surveillance, welcome to the Republic. Humanity's file had followed standard procedure. Diplomatic first contact was uneventful. Their envoys smiled, used correct honorifics, and expressed deep enthusiasm for peace. The initial survey noted an oxygen-rich atmosphere, modest surface gravity, a few sparse military satellites. Nothing alarming. The report concluded, species displays borderline obsession with environmental restoration and intends to focus on interstellar cooperation. Recommend Tier 4 classification, fast track. The vote was scheduled for the next cycle. Krell was only supposed to run the final compliance check, a formality. He pulled up humanity's own planetary database, the one they had freely handed over as part of their application packet. It contained raw environmental monitoring data, geological surveys, atmospheric logs. He began scrolling. The first thing he noticed was the sheer scale. Earth's surface was a patchwork of extraction sites. Entire mountains in the Western Hemisphere had been systematically removed, not eroded over millennia, but peeled away in decades for coal and copper. The Bingham Canyon excavation was over 2 miles wide and nearly 3/4 of a mile deep. It was visible from low orbit. They had dug that just to get at trace metals. Then there were the rivers. Krell found engineering logs detailing how humans had reversed the flow of entire tributaries, diverted massive waterways for irrigation, and built dams so colossal they altered the planet's rotational inertia by a measurable fraction. One structure, the Three Gorges, had created a reservoir hundreds of kilometers long, drowning entire cities and forcing millions to relocate. They did it for electrical power. He kept digging. Climate records showed a deliberate century-long injection of carbon into the atmosphere that had melted polar ice caps and acidified oceans. Species extinction rates were 1,000 times the natural background. They knew it was happening, and they continued anyway, not out of malice, but because the machinery of their civilization demanded it. That disturbed him more than anything. This was not a strategy. This was a metabolic function. Then he found the nuclear files. That was when his manipulators began to tremble. The Baker test, 1946. They had suspended a 21-kiloton device beneath a shallow sea and detonated it just to observe the effects. The blast vaporized millions of tons of seawater, created a crater 300 meters wide, and cracked the seafloor. They recorded data on radioactive fallout, on the destruction of test ships, on the behavior of the mushroom cloud. And then they did it again. hundreds of times on their own islands in their own atmosphere underground. Their planet still bore the scars. Krell ran a simulation. If a species was willing to do this to its own home, the only biosphere it had, what algorithm could predict its behavior in an interstellar context? He input the known variables: resource consumption rate, engineering capability, conflict history, environmental modification index. The classification engine chugged for a few seconds and returned a result he had never seen outside training simulations. Tier 2, armed and aggressive. Recommend immediate surveillance, no trade, defensive posture. He stared at the screen. Tier 2. And that was assuming they stayed on their own world. If they scaled outward, if they treated foreign systems the way they treated Earth, they would leap to Tier 1 in a generation. Krell appended the data to the file and hit transmit. The emergency protocol required a council review within the hour. He waited. The response came from High Chancellor Pelos, the official who had personally sponsored humanity's Tier 4 recommendation. Analyst Krell, the message read, your thoroughness is noted. However, the data only confirms destructive behavior toward their own planet. There is zero evidence of extraterrestrial aggression. The coalition does not police internal environmental practices. The Tier 4 classification stands. Krell felt cold. He pulled up the star charts. Earth sat at the edge of an unexplored arm, rich with resources. They had just handed a species of planetary engineers unlimited access to the galaxy, and no one was watching. The final line of the report echoed in his mind, classification unchanged. But he could not shake the thought that the galaxy had just made a terrible mistake, and that one day soon it would be too late to correct it. Krell spent that night in his quarters, the glow of the data screen painting his face in pale blue. Sleep was impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the excavator pits, the reversed rivers, the seafloor cracked open like an eggshell by a device they called Baker. He told himself the Chancellor was right. The coalition had rules. Planets were sovereign territory. What a species did within its own gravity well was its own affair. The logic held together until he remembered one detail from the geological files that he could not unsee. Earth's crust was riddled with thousands of blast craters from weapons tests, some atomic, some chemical, some he could not even categorize, and every single one of them had been conducted years before humanity ever achieved reliable spaceflight. They had been testing weapons of planetary destruction long before they could escape the consequences. They never planned to stop. They were simply running out of room. He requisitioned the full diplomatic packet from the Jishi Combine, the species that had made first contact. The packet was enormous, terabytes of cultural data, historical archives, genome maps. He set his script parser to scan for terms related to conflict, and the screen lit up like a holiday display. There were over 800 distinct wars in the human record. They categorized them by scale: regional wars, continental wars, and then two they called world wars, each claiming between 50 and 80 million lives. The human delegate Smith had spoken of these as relics of a painful past, a cautionary chapter they had moved beyond. But Krell cross-referenced the dates. Their Second World War had concluded only 79 solar cycles before the Jishi made contact. 79 cycles. To the coalition, that was barely a single generation. The humans had not moved beyond anything. They were living in the immediate aftermath. He dug further. The war histories contained technical schematics. One weapon in particular caught his attention, a device they called the Tsar Bomba, detonated over a remote Arctic island. Its yield was 50 megatons. The fireball alone was over 5 kilometers wide. The shockwaves circled their planet 3 times. They built this device not because they needed it, but to prove they could. And then they never used it again, because doing so would have rendered their own atmosphere unbreathable. Krell sat back. The coalition's threat index was based on capability and intent. The humans had demonstrated capability far beyond anything their current technology profile suggested. And intent? Intent was the wrong question. The humans did not need to intend harm. Harm was simply the exhaust of their progress. Krell compiled a new report. 1,500 pages of evidence, cross-indexed with coalition threat metrics. He uploaded it under emergency seal and sent it directly to the Council's Security Committee. The response arrived in 7 minutes, not from the committee, but from the High Chancellor's office. A single line. Your concerns have been noted and dismissed. Further unauthorized access to diplomatic archives will result in termination, not termination of employment. The word meant something else in coalition legal code. Krell felt his throat tighten. He was now a liability. He did not stop. He copied the data onto an isolated storage crystal and took it to the only delegate he trusted, an old contact from the Torkin Dominion. The Torkins were the only other species on the council with anything resembling a military history, and even theirs was a single century of civil war that had ended 4,000 cycles ago. Delegate Thalax reviewed the files in silence. When she finished, she placed the crystal back on the table and spoke in a whisper. You realize what you have found, she said. These humans are not merely environmental vandals. They are combat evolved. Every adaptation in their biology and psychology was forged in millions of years of competition. Then their technology accelerated faster than their evolution could temper. They are the survivors of a death world who learned to love the death in it. The Coalition has never encountered a species like this. The entire classification system was built for children. Thalax agreed to request a closed session of the Security Committee, using her diplomatic privilege. Krell could only wait. The hours crawled. In the corridor outside his office, he noticed new security drones patrolling. Their ocular lenses lingered on him as they passed. The summons came through with no sender ID, a single encrypted line. Come to Hangar Bay 12. Come alone. The truth you are seeking has arrived. Krell's instinct screamed trap, but the alternative was sitting still while a species of planetary engineers quietly expanded through the frontier. He slid the storage crystal into his vest pocket and walked out of his office into the dimly lit corridor. Every drone turned to watch him go. Hangar Bay 12 was silent. The cavernous space smelled of coolant and ozone, dimly lit by emergency strips along the floor. Krell stepped inside, his footsteps echoing off the alloy walls. A single figure stood beside a small scout vessel, tall, lean, wrapped in a travel cloak. It turned, and he recognized the face immediately. Delegate Smith, the human, the one who had smiled and cracked jokes about their planet's name meaning dirt. He was not smiling now. You're the analyst, Smith said. The one who's been digging. Good. We need to talk, and we don't have much time. Krell's manipulators tightened around the storage crystal. I don't understand. You're the species under review. Why would you reach out to me? Smith's expression flickered. Because my government doesn't know I'm here. They'd court-martial me if they did. But there are things you need to know that the official packet doesn't include. Things the Coalition buried on purpose. Follow me. He led Krell into the scout vessel's cramped cockpit and sealed the hatch. The ship's interior was warm, a human preference. Smith activated a holographic display, and a star map bloomed between them. It showed the local arm of the galaxy, with Earth at the edge and dozens of Coalition systems marked in blue. Then Smith overlaid a second layer. Red dots appeared, pulsing outward from Earth in a slow, steady wave. This is our real expansion, Smith said. We didn't just send diplomats. We've been seeding colonies on marginal worlds for over 30 cycles. Worlds the Coalition cataloged as uninhabitable, high gravity, toxic atmosphere, extreme temperatures. You'd call them death worlds. We call them home. Every single one is now a functional outpost. Industrial bases, shipyards, resource extraction. The Coalition's sensors can't detect half of them because they blend in with the geology. We learned how to hide from ourselves before we ever met you." Krell stared at the display. The red wave had already passed 3 uninhabited systems claimed by the Coalition under the Frontier Accord. If humans were colonizing those systems without authorization, it was a direct violation. It meant war. "Why tell me this?" Krell whispered. "You've just handed me proof of an illegal expansion. The Council will vote to militarize the border." Smith leaned back, his face haggard. "Because you're the only one who asked the right question, and because my own people are lying to me. They told us the Coalition welcomed us as equals, but I've seen the internal memos. They plan to designate us a Tier 2 threat and quarantine our homeworld within the next 2 cycles. The peaceful greeting was a delay tactic while they amass a fleet. I'm giving you the truth so you can stop both our governments from doing something irreversible. Because if the Coalition tries to lock my species into a single star system, they won't be trying to cage a harmless herbivore. They'll be poking a wounded predator, and I have seen the wounds up close." He pulled up a new file. It was a geological survey of Earth from 15 cycles before first contact. The planet's biosphere was in severe decline. Ocean acidification had reached critical thresholds. Atmospheric carbon was at levels not seen in 14 million years. Extinction rates were accelerating beyond any prior mass event. "We knew we were dying," Smith said. "The environmental collapse wasn't a side effect of progress. It was the bill coming due. Our leaders saw the stars as the only escape valve, so we poured everything into interstellar technology. Jishi contact accelerated our timeline by a century, but we were already on the path. We stripped our mountains, reversed our rivers, burned our seas, all to buy enough time to reach the threshold. And the most terrifying part, it worked. The planet broke so we could leave. And now that we're out here, do you think any treaty will keep us contained in a system we've already consumed?" Krell's mind raced. The environmental destruction wasn't incidental. It was a calculated burn. Humanity hadn't just wounded their planet because they were careless. They had knowingly traded their home for escape velocity. That meant the urgency behind their expansion was absolute. There was no negotiating with a species whose survival hinged on spreading. The classification system had no category for that. Outside, an alarm blared. Red lights flashed through the hangar bay's viewport. Smith's head snapped up. "They've tracked my vessel. Krell, you need to decide right now. You came here looking for the truth. You have it. The question is what you do with it. Because in about 3 minutes this bay will be flooded with security drones and my ship will be impounded. If that happens, the Coalition will have all the evidence they need to justify a strike. And my people will finally have the one thing they've never been given, an enemy they can point to and call evil." Smith held out a data chip. "This contains the full colonial records plus a proposal, a second contact, real contact, warrior to warrior. There's a faction among our military that believes we have more in common with the Coalition's warrior species than our own diplomats will admit. I'm asking you to find the one delegate who will understand. The VAR delegate Axion. Give him this, tell him what I've told you, because if anyone in that chamber can stop a war, it's the people who already know what it feels like to be feared for what you are." Krell took the chip. The door of the hangar bay began grinding open. Drone shadows slid across the deck. Smith fired up the scout vessel's thrusters. "Go, now. I'll hold them off as long as I can." Krell stumbled out of the ship, clutching the chip, and ran for the service corridor. Behind him, the roar of engines and the whine of stunned pulses filled the bay. He did not look back. The galaxy was balanced on the thinnest blade, and the only way to stop it from cutting was to walk directly into the heart of the warrior's den. Krell did not stop running until he reached the VAR delegation wing. The guards at the entrance towering, red-scaled, their eyes tracking with predatory focus, stepped aside when they saw the panic on his face. He had expected interrogation. Instead, the massive doors slid open without a word. Axion was already waiting. The VAR delegate stood in the center of his chamber, arms crossed, a rumble of amusement vibrating deep in his chest. Analyst Krell, you carry something alive, I can smell it. A truth. Give it to me. Krell handed over the data chip, his manipulators trembling. Axion inserted it into a wall panel, and the holographic star map filled the room. The red wave of human expansion pulsed across the frontier. The geological reports scrolled beneath it, a planet burning to launch its children into the void. Axion did not gasp. He did not recoil. He watched the full playback in silence, and when it ended, he turned to Krell with an expression that was not horror but something closer to recognition. "This is the truth we have been waiting for," he said. "Your council sees a plague. I see a species forged in the same fire as my own. They do not destroy for pleasure. They destroy because they must grow. Give a warrior room or he will make it. Deny him and you will learn why the galaxy fears Deathworlders." Krell struggled to speak. "But the coalition, they will vote for quarantine, for war." Axion shook his head. "Then we must vote first. You have the evidence. I have the influence. Together, we can force an emergency session before the Security Committee's strike fleet leaves dry dock. And we will bring Delegate Smith if he still breathes." The council chamber was half empty when the session was called, but those who attended carried the weight of the entire republic. High Chancellor Pelos stood at the central podium, her face a mask of controlled fury. Krell was permitted to present his findings. He uploaded the colonial records, the environmental indices, the nuclear test logs, and the damning star map. He played the recording of Smith's warning, and he concluded with a single line: "We have two choices. Rewrite the classification to reflect reality and negotiate, or impose quarantine and find out firsthand whether humans fight harder when they have nothing left to lose." The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted over one another. Some called for Krell's arrest. Others demanded the human ambassador be expelled. In the chaos, Axion rose and silence fell like a blade. "I have served this council for 200 cycles. I have watched you classify species based on what you wish them to be, not what they are. The humans are not Tier 4. They are Tier 1 in waiting, and if you push them, they will become the enemy you fear. But give them a place at the table, true partnership, not containment, and their hunger can be aimed outward. I know this, because it is what my own people needed, and what you never gave us." Pelos attempted to reclaim the floor, but the doors at the rear of the chamber hissed open. Delegate Smith limped inside, his clothing scorched, a containment cuff on one wrist. He had been detained but released by VAR intervention. He walked to the center and faced the Chancellor. "You were going to lock us in a dying system," he said. "Don't deny it. Our intelligence intercepted the fleet deployments. I'm here to tell you that if those ships cross our border, you will not be intercepting a colony vessel. You will meet a defense grid built by a species that learned to weaponize its own extinction." The room held its breath. Krell watched the Chancellor's composure crack. For the first time, she looked not angry but afraid. The emergency reclassification was no longer a recommendation. It was a fact. The button would be pressed not to warn but to acknowledge what was already true. Krell approached the console. His manipulator hovered over the hollow key. He looked at Smith, then at Axion, then at the sea of stunned delegates, and he pressed it. The system chimed. The file for humanity, stamped Tier 4 Harmless for the last time, vanished. In its place appeared a new entry, glowing amber, Tier 1 Provisional, Expansionist, potentially hostile, open to negotiation but not trust. All diplomatic privileges immediately suspended pending binding accords. The chamber descended into a heavy silence. Smith exhaled slowly, and for a moment his shoulders sagged with the exhaustion of a mask finally removed. "That was always the real goal," he whispered, low enough that only Krell heard. "We needed you to see us clearly, not as pets, not as monsters, as what we are. Now we can actually talk." And somewhere in the depths of the galactic frontier, human colony ships that had been drifting silent and cold began to power up their long-range transmitters. The The signal they broadcast was not a surrender. It was an invitation. The galaxy had just reclassified humanity, but humanity had already reclassified the galaxy, and it was now, finally, ready to answer. The coalition had spent millennia believing that true danger always announces itself with fangs, with claws, with warships in formation. They never considered that the most dangerous species might be the one that smiles at first contact, that offers a handshake, that jokes about its home world being named after dirt. And they certainly never considered that the most terrifying weapon in the galaxy is not a bomb, but a planet that was loved to death and left behind. Krell's reclassification did not prevent the crisis. It merely named it. The century that followed would see humanity spread faster than any species in recorded history, not as conquerors, but as desperate refugees who had already burned one world and would not let a second be taken from them. Treaties were signed, borders were drawn, and the coalition learned a hard lesson. You cannot contain a species that has already learned to survive its own annihilation. The question that haunted the council chambers was not whether humanity could be trusted. It was whether trust had ever been the point. They had evolved on a world where every resource was contested, every advantage temporary, and survival itself was a daily act of violence against an indifferent planet. They were never harmless. They were simply patient. So the next time you see a human diplomat smile and talk about environmental restoration, remember what that smile conceals. They are not lying. They are simply waiting for you to understand the scale of what they have already done. Thank you for watching. If stories like this make you rethink what you know about the universe, hit subscribe and join us for the next one.